The scene opens on a place completely devastated by fire. Then we see our protagonist amidst the flames, thinking his life has been a complete failure. He couldn't stop his younger brothers from leaving and abandoning him, and the young man also couldn't save those who chose to stay by his side. Above all, he was standing in front of a huge fire, unable to do anything. This calamity was caused by a group of sinister men dressed in black. They were known to everyone as the evil blood cult. The young man regrets not having protected the Seongui clan from this tragedy. At this moment, he understands that enemies attack first and talk later, so the clan leader Lee Hoo admits that his martial arts might be weak, but he will certainly at least choose the place where he will meet his end with that. The warrior begins to fight bravely against several opponents at once. Even surrounded, the leader doesn't give up and lets out a war cry, charging into the attack. With a swift move, he manages to land a direct hit on one of the enemies. However, the young man ends up injured and wounded while lamenting his horrible life. He regrets becoming the leader, just because he was the oldest disciple. Suddenly, the young man's body starts to sink into deep, dark waters. He opens his eyes, shocked and completely confused by what's happening. Bubbles rise to the surface of the water, which reflects a golden light. The protagonist then emerges from the water, spitting everything out. Looking around, he wonders if he's in a river near a large building. He remembers being injured by a cultist's blade and doesn't understand how he's alive. Someone calls him older brother, and the young man looks to the side, startled. Then he sees a small child desperately struggling in the current. At that moment, the young man recognizes the little boy named Ho Yan. The boy was taken in by their master, and the protagonist practically raised him. He remembers carrying little Ho Yan on his back while the master was traveling. The leader recalls trying to save the boy in the past, but ultimately failing. With a sweaty face, he is shocked to realize the little boy is alive in front of him. Without a second thought, the young man swims as fast as he can to save the child. His hand stretches out to reach the boy, but it seems like something is wrong. Suddenly, the two of them start sinking together into the icy water. Little Ho Yan calls out for his older brother with his last bit of strength. The protagonist hugs him, but his body begins to freeze because of the river. He remembers that the first time, his body froze up, and he couldn't save the boy. But this time, with a determined look, the young man won't let history repeat itself. He decides he won't lose him a second time, and activates a new martial art. The young man then forces his frozen body to move with all his energy. With a blue aura surrounding him, he finally manages to break free, and this time, the protagonist manages to grab the child and save him from drowning. He thinks that his body is still fragile and has barely started building its foundation. Forcing his internal energy is tearing the walls of his meridians, and this action is causing considerable damage inside his body. But suddenly, the young man gets confused by what he's feeling. His internal energy isn't decreasing. On the contrary, it's growing. In fact, his energy is multiplying at an absurd rate. The young man looks at little Ho Yan, who is now safe in his arms. With that, he hugs the little boy tightly, determined to protect him. He promises that this time, his older brother will truly save him. Then, with his fist clenched, the young man releases a great amount of power, and using this new energy, the two of them begin to rise to the surface. Now he can feel the flow of the river and even the movement of the fish. His senses are expanding in a way he never imagined. At this moment, he understands that one encompasses 10,000, and 10,000 are one. Suddenly, a huge explosion of golden energy bursts out of the water. Soon after, the protagonist finally manages to get out of the river with the boy. He then steps firmly onto the wooden platform beside the river. Now with white hair, the young man carries the unconscious boy on his back. But the effort was so great that he ends up collapsing from exhaustion. Lying on the ground, the protagonist complains of a severe headache. His physical and mental stamina was completely drained from using so much power. Forcing his ki made his whole body ache, but he is still conscious. Despite everything, he is happy because little Ho-yan is alive and safe. He managed to save the little boy, and that's all that matters to him. With the boy in his arms, he says they are going back home to the clan. Then the young man starts walking towards the clan, carrying the boy. He makes his way through the mountains, illuminated by the sunlight. Arriving there, he finds two young disciples at the clan's entrance. They are surprised to see him, and one of them calls him older brother. The boy named Dango. Yul asks what happened to his hair. The protagonist just gives a tired smile without answering the question. Then the girl, Chawa, asks with concern what happened to the two of them. The three of them gather in front of the clan's main building to talk. Looking at the building, he realizes he has really gone back to the past. He looks out the window and sees the familiar landscape of his old home. Everyone fantasizes about going back in time at least once, and so did he. But now that it has happened, he's exhausted by the whole situation. The young man wonders why on earth he has to do all of this over again. His master didn't care about the clan's affairs and was always wandering around. That's why he took care of everything, from babysitting to managing the fields. He barely earned enough money to pay for everyone's next meal, and yet his master kept bringing in new disciples out of nowhere. With a desperate expression, the young man complains that the clan seemed like a bankrupt orphanage. He is by little Ho-hyan's bedside, taking care of him through the night. The young man smiles in relief when he sees the boy's fever has finally gone down. Thinking about it, he realizes they were a clan in name only. His master was Yu Hunjin, a renowned swordsman and the clan's founder. But even though he was the best martial artist in the region, he never taught them anything. The young man wonders if it was because he simply had no talent for martial arts. He suffered terribly, and in the end, was taken down by fanatics from the blood cult. With a thoughtful look, the young man seems to be coming up with a plan in his mind. He throws himself back, determined not to live that life again. In his past life, he lived that way because he was the head disciple and clan leader. But now, he refuses to repeat the same failed life as before. That's why in this new life, he's going to do things differently. The young man goes to his master, and the man asks what he just said. The young man introduces himself as his disciple, Li Hoi, and reaffirms his decision. He declares that from now on, he will live exactly as he wants. The master repeats the question, and the young man again says he will live as he wants. He repeats firmly that from that moment on, he will live as he pleases. The master is silent for a moment, a drop of sweat trickling down. He then scoffs at the young man's idea of living as he wants. The young man is a bit embarrassed by his master's unexpected reaction. The man then closes his eyes and thinks for a moment about what he heard. He then stands up and invites his disciple for a walk. The young man is confused and a little suspicious of the sudden invitation. The two of them walk under the moonlight on a starry and silent night. Master and disciple walk side by side along the clan's wooden walkway. The master comments that anyone who saw them would think the young man was the master, and asks if this idea of living as he wants was what turned his hair white. The young man is shocked and wonders if his master was making a joke. The two of them stop walking, and the master becomes thoughtful for a moment. He then thanks the young man with a sincere smile on his face. The master says that little Ho-yan survived thanks to him. He had forgotten to say it, so he wanted to make sure he did. The young man remembers that from the day Ho-yan passed, his master changed. He performed a sword dance every day for 49 days. The young man realizes his master was suffering deeply but never showed it. The master admits that he knows his disciple suffers because of his indifference. With an outstretched hand, the master sincerely thanks him for everything he has done. With a smile, the master pats the young man's head and says he has already grown up so much. He then says it's okay and that the young man can live as he wants. The young man is surprised, as he didn't expect to get permission so easily. The master then asks if he has already decided how he will live from now on. The young man is speechless, and the master realizes he hasn't decided yet, but he reassures him, saying that it doesn't matter what choice he makes. With an intense gaze, the master looks at him and reaffirms his support, and the master guarantees that he will always be by his side, no matter what. The young man is moved, and with a flushed face, he smiles shyly. In his entire life, he never knew what his master truly felt. He never imagined that his master thought of him in that way. The master comments that the night is getting late, and the young man feels something strange. He then tells the young man to go back inside and rest. As the young man walks away, the master watches him with a proud smile. He remembers when he found the young man in a village devastated by a plague. The boy was the same age as his son who had passed away. Because of this resemblance, he couldn't ignore the child, and since then, he took the boy in and raised him as his own son. The young man never acted spoiled and never caused any trouble. The master admits that he has been very indifferent all this time. He can't be a father to the young man, but he can be a master who is like a father. He looks at the clan and thinks that this place is his home. It's his sect and his home, and he will protect it at all costs. Now he feels that he finally knows the path he must follow. He can't abandon the path he has walked so far, but he can change it. With a firm step, he decides that he will act differently from now on. He will live like a true master and be a roof over his disciples' heads. He wonders how these children will grow from now on. Suddenly, he senses a strange energy coming from inside the clan. It's an ambient energy that makes him curious and a little worried. He feels the energy swirling as if it were inhaling and exhaling, and to his surprise, the energy is coming directly from his disciple. The young man feels it's happening again, and he can see the energy. They are hot and cold, solid and heavy energies at the same time. Energies with different natures are swirling and entering his body. He concentrates this energy in his hands, creating a glowing sphere. The energy that emerged endlessly recedes again like the tide. Normally, a cultivation method establishes a foundation in the danshin first, but at the moment, these steps are being completely ignored. With a determined look, he realizes this is not the method he knows. He understands that 10,000 are contained in one, and that 10,000 are one. An explosion of energy envelops him, and he realizes he recited the incantation. He exhales in relief and thinks it's all just a baseless hunch. Suddenly, the young man begins to levitate and is enveloped by a blue aura. He floats in the air as the energy swirls around him like a whirlwind. The energy forms a glowing sphere, and he finds it beautiful. The master watches everything from a distance, completely shocked by what he is seeing. The young man recognizes the walls, the flowers, and the trees of the clan. He sees the image of his family and feels connected to all of them. This was the place where he spent his entire life, and where his life came to an end. With a faint smile, he accepts his conflicting feelings about the place. He feels love and hate, resentment and guilt, frustration and warmth. All the emotions intertwine, and he feels a connection with everything in the world. Everything in the world connects, and he feels a sense of unity. His hair floats, and he appears to be in a trance-like state. With his eyes closed, he realizes he has finally grasped a small clue. Suddenly, he feels a sense of release and becomes confused. Something strange happens to his body, and he gets scared. A dark energy seems to crack his body from the inside out. He bends over in pain, not understanding what is happening to him. With a panicked expression, he realizes his danshin has disappeared. He wonders if the result of that bizarre experience was the loss of his danshin. His master congratulates him, and he is completely confused by the situation. The man congratulates him again as he approaches with a smile. He says the young man finally found his path after deciding to live recklessly. With a mysterious smile, he asks what the young man found in the manhwa he opened. The young man is confused and wonders what exactly he opened. He just says that it feels as if his danshin has disappeared. The master explains that the manhwa divine art produces 10,000 interpretations. and that the key to mastering it is to open the Manhwa and find your own path. One must find their own interpretation to master the art. Depending on the interpretation, it can become a divine or a demonic art. The master places a hand on the young man's head and looks at him seriously. He says it's a relief that the young man has found his own path, because that way, he won't have to follow the same path as him. The young man remembers that his master is an unparalleled expert in Ensanghayan, but he doesn't understand why it's better not to follow the same path as him. With a thoughtful look, he realizes he knows very little about his master. The master then tells him to go back inside as he has had a long day. The young man obeys and watches his master walk away in silence. He always complained that his master's teachings were insufficient, but now he understands that the mental technique itself was a sufficient teaching. It was entirely up to him to master that technique and find his own path. He still doesn't know what he has realized or what his Manhwa is. Tired, the young man walks down the clan's hallway towards his room. He wishes someone would open the door for him, because he is so exhausted. Suddenly, the door opens by itself, and he is startled by what happened. He looks at the open door, shocked and not understanding how it was possible. He thinks it's not like the door would close, just because he said so. But then he remembers wishing for the door to open. He looks at his hand and at the open door, completely perplexed. With a hand to his mouth, he wonders if this could be telekinesis. It's an art that only masters of internal energy who have reached their peak can perform. He tries to use the ability again and manages to levitate a ladle. With the ladle floating, he feels powerful and a little surprised. He thinks that he suddenly gained such a powerful art without any effort. But he can only lift something as heavy as a ladle. He isn't disappointed, as his only dream is to have a simple and peaceful life. Using his new ability, he lights the fire for cooking. A fiery aura envelops him, and he feels vitality flowing into him. He realizes that the abilities he gained are related to everyday life. Even when sweeping the courtyard or drawing water from the well, energy surges within him. It's an almost useless ability for a martial artist. Suddenly, he realizes he ended up doing chores out of habit. He lived like this for decades, so it became a hard habit to break. Someone calls him, and he turns to see little Hoyeon at the door, with a cute face. The boy says he's hungry and asks when they're going to eat. The young man smiles and says everything is ready, and they can go eat. The little boy runs excitedly to the dining room, while the young man watches him. With a satisfied smile, he thinks that for now, everything is fine. He decides he will think carefully about how he will live from now on. The family gathers for a happy and peaceful meal in the dining room. He remembers that in his previous life, it was rare to have a meal with his master. With a smile, he thinks his master must be happy because Hoyeon is alive. Little Hoyeon eats excitedly while the others watch him fondly. With a mischievous smile, the young man uses his telekinesis to make bean sprouts float. The others are amazed by the trick, and little Hoyeon gets excited. The little boy raises his hand and says he wants to eat the floating bean sprouts. The young man then feeds the boy the bean sprouts using his telekinesis. The other disciples look at the scene with admiration and a bit of envy. He thinks that using his new ability to feed the boy is very convenient, but he wonders if it's right to use telekinesis for such trivial things. Little Hoyeon smiles happily as he eats the floating bean sprouts. The master watches the scene with a thoughtful look and a faint smile on his face. The other disciples get excited and say they want to do that too. The young man realizes that the more he uses telekinesis, the more energy surges, and the more energy surges, the stronger his ability becomes in a virtuous cycle. One of the bean sprouts seems to come to life and starts dancing on the table. The young man remembers there were happy moments like this in his past life. Things weren't just difficult and heavy as he remembered. With a smile, he decides he will enjoy this moment a little longer. Suddenly, the master calls him and says, there will be a meeting at the main sect. The news catches the young man by surprise, and he tenses up at the table. Everyone at the table falls silent, and the atmosphere suddenly becomes heavy. With a serious expression, he asks if the master really said the word meeting. Before the master established the sect in Ansang Haiyan, 4 martial factions reigned. These factions were powerful and controlled the entire region with an iron fist. The Oso sect was one of them, known for its brute force and aggressive fighting style. The Jangyan clan was another powerful faction that dominated the night with its techniques. The Down faction was known for its elegance and use of fans in combat. And the Chagan gang was feared by all because of its cruelty and thirst for power. When the Seongui Sect was established, the 4 factions proposed a meeting. Instead of causing friction, they chose harmony and checks and balances. The young man thinks it's been a long time since he heard the word harmony, but after his master was gone, there was no more harmony among the factions. The fall of the Seongui Sect began, and the Chagan gang rose. The gang quickly took over the influence the Seongui Sect had, as he had to lead the sect after the master's disappearance. With a clenched fist, he remembers all the suffering he went through, but he remembers that the bad fortune began even before the master's downfall. He tries to calm himself down and thinks that many things are different this time. He saved Hoyan, so he can't say the same things will happen. Little Hoyan calls him and asks him to do the trick again. With a tired smile, the young man agrees and uses his telekinesis once more. He wonders if nothing will happen this time, and hopes everything will be fine. Finally, the day of the 5 sects meeting arrives in the city. They paid wages to the nearby shops and inns to hire labor. The young man remembers that whenever the meeting approached, his master would bring silver, spending a lot of money on the meeting despite the sect's circumstances. He remembers asking the master about the misuse of money. The master explains that the meeting is a kind of party for the poor and the vagrants. With this purpose in mind, the master continues the meeting even though he isn't sociable. In the kitchen, the cooks prepare a large amount of food for the party. With a satisfied smile, the young man thinks it already looks like a real party. Little Hoyan introduces himself to the other disciples and explains how they live. He excitedly tells them that he fell into the river and his older brother saved him. The others are delighted with the story and praise the boy's bravery. One of the disciples points to the young man and says he will guide the guests. With a proud smile, he praises the little warrior's maturity. A little girl shyly approaches the young man and calls him older brother. He turns to her, and the girl hides behind him in embarrassment. 2 women watch the scene and comment on the girl's cuteness and shyness. With a smile, the young man says she ran away because of the compliments. He pats the girl's head and thinks that she isn't used to this. After being separated from her family, she rarely received attention and affection. Suddenly, someone yells that they are arriving, and everyone is on alert. A group of men approaches the clan with firm and determined steps. The Seongui family lines up to welcome the guests at the clan's entrance. A man with a large mustache laughs and says they arrived earlier than expected. He introduces himself as Kwaksa, who, the leader of the Chagan gang. The master greets him, and the young man eyes the gang with suspicion. The gang leader laughs and says it's been a while since they last met. He came with his son today so he can broaden his horizons. The young man remembers that after his master was gone, Kwaksa, who crushed them. But the real misfortune lies elsewhere, and he knows it. He intends to crush it completely and miserably this time. He remembers the vice leader of the Chagan gang, Kwak Chil Wu. The banquet begins, and everyone sits down to eat and drink together. The young man thinks that in his past life, Kwak Chil Wu never showed up at the meeting. The vice leader eats quietly while the young man watches him from a distance. He wonders if the meeting was moved up because of Hoyan's memorial. Little Hoyan calls him and asks if he's not going to do the trick today. The young man says no because there are too many guests and asks if he can eat by himself. He remembers that the date of the meeting has changed and hopes things will be different. He remembers the terrible things that happened in his past life. He calls his second brother and gives him an important order. When the meal is over, he must take the younger disciples to their room. The second brother gets worried and asks if it's okay for him to do it alone. With a serious look, the young man tells him to make sure he doesn't leave the room. The second brother nods in agreement, understanding the gravity of the situation. Some guests stand up, satisfied, and say their goodbyes after the meal. The young man asks them to take care of the cleaning, and they readily agree. Even though he sent the disciples to their room, he is still anxious. Suddenly, he hears hurried footsteps and turns to see what's happening. Little Hoyan runs towards him, crying and calling for his brother. The young man is surprised to see him and wonders why he isn't in his room. He picks the boy up and hugs him to calm his crying. With tears in his eyes, the little boy calls for his second martial brother. With a dark look, he asks where the other children are now. He remembers there was also trouble with the Jagok Hall in the past. Someone would offend them by calling them filthy orphans and beggars, but calling it trouble was an exaggeration since it was a one-sided beatdown. Even though he was an expert's son, young Dangle wasn't trained back then. He was no different from any other kid his age and took a lot of hits. For a new sect like Shaon Guman, fighting with the Jagok Hall would have been crazy. And above all, it was obvious that the master would be the one to suffer for it. Because of that, the protagonist just watched his friend on the ground, all hurt. He would bow in apology and ask them to pretend nothing happened. But that was the last time he ever let his friend down. With those eyes in his mind, he hugs little Hoyan. He regretted that for his entire life, and now things would be different. Determined, the young man promises himself he won't make the same mistake. Back in the present, the younger disciples are getting pushed around and yelling for them to stop. One of the girls lands a punch on one of the bullies who called her an orphan. With a look of contempt, the man calls her an annoying little pest. But the second brother firmly grabs the bully's leg. With his face bruised and crying, he demands that the man apologize. He yells at the bully to take back what he said about the girl being an orphan. Then, the man lands a hard punch on the second brother's face. The boy falls to the ground, his nose bleeding and his face covered in scratches. With a hand on his face, he looks up in a state of shock. The older brothers arrive and see the scene with wide eyes. The protagonist gets furious and says his older brother has really annoyed him. He then turns to the bully and recognizes him as the young master of the Jagok Hall. Seeing his brother down on the ground, he becomes even more enraged. With a hateful expression, he asks why he's picking on the disciples. Suddenly, the gang's leader appears with a smirk on his face. The little girl runs to help the second brother and calls out to the protagonist. He clenches his fist, realizing the situation is about to blow up. The second brother explains that the other guy started it by calling the girl a filthy orphan. The young master smiles and asks what happens if he doesn't apologize. Without hesitation, the protagonist lands a powerful blow on the young master's face. The bully is sent flying, and his companions are in shock. The other disciples look at the scene, completely surprised by his actions. Little Hyun smiles happily and says excitedly that the young man hit him. With a trembling hand, the protagonist apologizes to his master in his thoughts. He then decides that this disciple is going to live recklessly from now on. The young master gets up with a dark aura emanating from his body. With his eyes glowing red, he asks if the young man really just hit him. Furious, the young master yells, wondering how a mere disciple dares to attack him. With a confident smile, the young man confirms that yes, he did hit him. He then yells angrily, asking how the bully dares to strike his disciples. With bruised faces, the younger siblings look at him worriedly. The young master thinks the guy has lost his mind and prepares for a counter-attack. With a swift move, he throws a powerful punch toward the protagonist. The young man is thrown back by the blow as the younger ones scream his name. The other guests comment that the rumor about him being a weakling was true, but he gets back up and thinks he has barely started learning a cultivation method. He admits to himself that he never had a knack for fighting or martial arts. Even so, with a clenched fist, the young master moves in for another attack. The bully lands another solid blow right on the protagonist's face. He feels the strong impact of the punch and staggers back from the pain. Despite the hit, he manages to stay on his feet, surprising his opponent. The young master stares at him, surprised that he's still standing. With a determined expression, the young man prepares to continue the fight. The young master smiles and says that at least it was worth hitting him. He then leaps up and lands a powerful kick, knocking the young man to the ground. A blue aura starts to emanate from the protagonist's body as he gets up. The bully is surprised and wonders if that is internal energy. The two charge at each other, ready to exchange more blows. The young man thinks that he won't get beaten up in front of his disciples and blocks the punch. The young master is shocked and annoyed that his attack was stopped. With that, the two begin to trade punches and kicks in an intense fight. A cloud of dust rises as they continue their brawl. The onlookers are confused and wonder if this is just a street fight. The younger disciples cry desperately, calling for their big brother. The young man thinks that for a punch with internal power, the damage was light. He activates his internal energy, and his opponent is shocked by the power. With a smile, he realizes his Manhwa has been there all along. He clenches his fist and prepares to use his newfound power. The young master is scared by the amount of energy he's emanating. The protagonist then lands a devastating punch that knocks out his opponent. He remembers the past and how his friend never complained about the pain. With a bruised face, young Dangle just stared at him in silence. The young man thinks about how weak and untrustworthy he must have seemed to him, but he realizes that even so, his brother calls him Big Brother. With a smile, he thinks the disciples will pass out before he does. Lying on the ground, the young master wonders what just happened. The protagonist says it's time to sever that rotten bond for good. On the ground, the young master asks confusedly what he's talking about. He screams in desperation and asks what he did wrong to deserve this. The young man then hits him again and thinks that they only just met today. He remembers that in his past life, he endured everything, and that's why the sect fell. With a cry of fury, the protagonist rushes forward to attack once more. The young master looks at him with an expression of fear and surprise. With a powerful kick, the young man sends him flying into the air with force. The bully lands on his back on the ground, completely defenseless and dazed. Without mercy, the protagonist stomps hard on his opponent's hand. He looks down on him, while the other writhes in pain on the ground. On the ground, he yells and asks if the young man has any idea who he is. With a cold and determined gaze, the hero faces him without fear. The young man stands over him and says he knows him very well. He knows he's the heir to the Jogok Hall, and that his father won't forgive this. With his face bruised and bleeding, the young master admits he was wrong, but the protagonist stands up and thinks that he won't live like he did before. Suddenly, the leader of the Jogok Hall appears, yelling furiously. The young master calls for his father, while the young man watches him in silence. The bully then runs to take shelter in his father's arms. The clan leader protects him and yells, asking who dares to threaten his son. With a furious look, he sees the protagonist walking away from the scene. He then turns to the master and asks, "What is going on here?" The other leaders try to calm him down, saying it's just a kid's fight. Furious, he shows them the state of his son and asks how they can say that. The young master then challenges the sect leader to say something. The mood in the hall becomes tense, and everyone watches the scene in silence. The hall leader curses at him and says he's used to being insulted. He calls him an orphan and wonders why he didn't send the disciples to their room. The younger ones defend him and say the other boy started the trouble. The second brother also defends him, saying he didn't do anything wrong. With a moved expression, the young man feels grateful for his siblings' support. The hall leader gets even more irritated with the children talking back to him. The protagonist then approaches and tells him to speak directly to him. As his master watches, he introduces himself as the eldest disciple. He explains that the other one insulted and struck his siblings, and he only defended them. With a clenched fist, the hall leader prepares to attack the young man, but with his eyes glowing, the protagonist shows he isn't afraid. Suddenly, a laugh echoes through the hall, grabbing everyone's attention. It was the young man's master, who was watching everything with a slight smile. The hall leader glares at him and asks if he finds the situation funny. The hall leader glares at the master and asks if he thinks the situation is funny. With a smile, the master confirms that yes, he finds all of this very amusing. He explains that a guest came insulted and assaulted his hosts. With that, a dark and powerful aura emanates from the master's body. With a serious look, he thinks that it seems he has lived in peace for too long. The aura startles everyone as he laments the chaos that has broken out in his sect. The master then orders his disciples to go inside and tend to their wounds. The hall leader tries to protest, but is cut off by the man's glare. With a terrifying smile, he invites the young master to receive treatment. The other leaders watch the scene and see the man taking control. With no choice, the hall leader says he's leaving, and the master wishes him a good trip. One of the other guests leaves, while the master watches him in silence. He then calls his disciple, who promptly answers his call. The master says that if something like this happens again, he can live as he pleases. He assures him that he will take full responsibility, and the young man is shocked. With wide eyes, the protagonist realizes he didn't really know his master. He looks at his family and understands that things could have been like this. Far away, the hall leader and his son are cursing the son, Seongui Sect. The son reveals that he sent his men to provoke the disciples on purpose. The plan was to break their spirit so they wouldn't have to be careful around the sect. The father thinks of the young man's eyes and wonders if he will be the next leader. The son calls for his father, who suddenly stops walking, lost in thought. With a calculating look, the man says that he might need some help. With a wicked smile, he says he'll have to make a special request. Later that night, the Seongui Sect was calm and quiet. Lying in his bed, the young man reflects on the day's events. With a smile, he remembers his master's intimidating presence. He remembers the man's words about having lived in peace for too long. Just with his presence, the others cowered in fear in an instant. With a satisfied smile, he thinks that his master is stronger than he imagined. His face turns serious for a moment as he continues to think. He remembers his master telling him to live recklessly, and how the man promised he would take full responsibility. He had planned to endure everything alone and turn a blind eye like a fool, but he's tired of drowning in guilt and living that way. Suddenly, someone knocks on the door and asks if they can come into his room. With a gentle smile, he recognizes the voice and tells his brother to come in. The second brother enters the room and approaches the young man's bed. He invites him to sit and asks if he's okay after the fight. With a worried look, the young boy asks if his big brother was hurt. Joking, the young man says he feels like he could pass out at any moment. But he laughs and assures his brother he's just kidding and that everything is fine. With a smile, he pats the boy's head, who gets embarrassed by the gesture. The second brother then thanks him, and the protagonist is completely surprised. He wonders if this is the first time he's heard that in his 2 lives. With a blushing face, the boy sincerely thanks him for defending him. He then says excitedly that one day, he'll become someone like his big brother. Embarrassed by his own declaration, the young boy runs out of the room. The protagonist watches him leave, thinking about his words. He wonders why, of all people, his brother admires him so much. The second brother runs down the hall, his heart racing with happiness. He stops and remembers his difficult past before joining the sect. Getting pushed around was nothing new for him. After all, he was just a beggar. He remembers being kicked and assaulted by others on the streets. Lying on the ground, he would curl up in pain with no one to help him. There was no one to protect him from the bullies who surrounded him. They would hit him and demand he hand over the food he had managed to get. That was his life before he found a place to call home. He was a beggar who did whatever it took to survive on the streets. One day, he tried to steal a money pouch from a rich man. His hand reached out to grab the pouch, but something stopped him. Frightening eyes stared at him, filling him with a paralyzing fear. With a pale face, he backed away, terrified by the man's gaze. And that's how he met his master for the first time in his life. With a serene look, the young man's master remembers everything that happened. He remembers extending a hand to the scared young beggar. The second brother thinks that he never felt like that place was his home. But he remembers his big brother bravely defending him. The next morning, a new day begins at the sect with the rising sun. Sitting in bed, the young man thinks that he recovered faster than expected. He wonders if it was all thanks to his new divine art. Mela. Suddenly, he hears a noise and sees smoke coming from a room. The second brother appears, covered in soot and surprised to see him there. The young man wipes his face and asks if he was trying to cook. Embarrassed, the boy says he wanted a smoky flavor just like his. With a smile, the hero says he doesn't have to try so hard. He then tells him to go wash up, because it's time for breakfast. He notices that his brother has been trying really hard these past few days. The young man wonders why his big brother changed so suddenly. One of the girls explains that it was the first time he had someone on his side. With a moved look, the protagonist understands the reason for his admiration. He then remembers the boy's words, and it all makes sense now. The girl tells him that he tore his clothes trying to do the laundry. With a slight smile, he thinks it's a relief that he made the right choice. He feels happy that he made a different choice this time. The girl calls his name, and he says it's nothing, brushing off his thoughts. He offers to braid her hair, and the girl gets very excited. Holding hands, he thinks that this new life isn't so bad after all. With a smile, he decides to live recklessly with his disciples. The two walk together, and a blue aura surrounds them in a moment of peace. Suddenly, the young man finds himself in the middle of the burning sect and panics. He looks around, terrified, and wonders what's happening here. With a panicked face, he doesn't understand how everything caught fire so quickly. He sees the body of one of his brothers on the ground, asking to be saved. Desperate, he tries to reach him, but the flames surround him on all sides. He screams and feels the intense heat of the fire burning his skin. With a shout, he wakes up panting and in a cold sweat in his bed. Confused, he wonders if it was all just a nightmare. A dark figure looms over him and asks if he's finally awake. The mysterious figure leaps toward the bed of the young man, who is sleeping peacefully. Startled, he thinks that things were finally getting better in his life. He remembers his family and how he was changing the past he regretted. With a trembling hand, he believed this life would be more fulfilling than the last. The protagonist then realizes he can't move and wonders if he was drugged. At that, the assassin says it would have been easier if he had passed on in his sleep. With a dagger in hand, he warns that it will hurt more if the boy tries to dodge. With a smile, the man says that he can't move anyway. But suddenly, the young man rolls off the bed, dodging the fatal attack. Lying on the floor, he complains that his injuries aren't healed yet. Surprised, the assassin wonders how he managed to move like that. He questions if he used too little paralyzing powder, and the hero understands he was poisoned. Despite the poison, a blue aura emanates from his body, and he is able to move. The attacker says he won't be moving for long, and the young man knows he can't beat him. With a determined face, he realizes his only chance is to scream for help. But he panics when he remembers that his master's room is 150 paces away. On the floor, he watches the assassin slowly approaching for the attack. The man then reveals that his younger sister's room is only 20 paces away. With a face full of anger and despair, the young man calls him a scoundrel. With a smirk, the assassin praises him, saying he's smarter than he looks. He then explains that if the young man screams, his master will come running to the room. But before he arrives, the man will go to the girl's room and take care of her first. With a wicked look, he stares at him, waiting for a response from the paralyzed young man. Desperate, the protagonist wonders if there's no other choice but this. With a determined look, he thinks that if he's the only one to go, it's okay. He then clenches his fist on the floor, showing his great determination. Even so, He asks why he should trust the word of an assassin. He doesn't know who sent him and questions how he can trust that he'll spare his sister. The man just tells him to be a good boy and go quietly, bringing the dagger closer. In a swift move, the hero lunges forward and bites the assassin's arm hard. The attacker staggers back in pain while the young man falls to the floor, dazed. Still on the floor, he realizes he needs to aim for his opponent's legs. With a look of fury, he then grabs a metal candlestick that was nearby. The assassin is shocked and asks how he can still move like that. The young man lands a powerful blow on the man's leg, thinking of crippling him. He believes that way the man won't be able to harm his younger sister. Furious, the assassin calls him a brat, and the hero prepares for the next attack. But the man is faster and lands a kick that sends the young man flying. In pain, he gets up, and the assassin calls him a persistent brat with a dark aura. The man says that if it weren't for the contract, he'd make him suffer. With a smile on his face and his chest wounded, the young man sits on the floor, exhausted. He thinks it's all over and that now he can depart in peace. With his eyes closed, he believes that even if he goes, his sister will be safe. But suddenly, he opens his eyes, confused by what's happening around him. The assassin stares at him with an expression of surprise and pain, not understanding. With blood gushing from his neck, the attacker falls to his knees on the floor. The young man is shocked and wonders what just happened there. A familiar voice asks if he's okay, and the young man turns to look. It was his master, who looks at him with a serious expression and a sword in his hand. With wide eyes, the hero can't believe what he's seeing. The assassin's body now lay on the floor, completely lifeless. Relieved, the young man collapses on the floor and thinks that he managed to survive the attack. But his master watches him with a furious expression on his face. The young man tries to explain the situation, but the man just stares at him in silence. With a dark look, the master just tells him to follow, and the young man is confused. He then says that for once, he needs to act like his true master. With that, the two walk out of the room under the moonlight. The hero realizes that this path leads to the Chagan gang and gets worried. He then understands that besides them, no one else would send an assassin after him. Even so, he knows they don't have any evidence to prove it. Suddenly, the master calls him by his name, and the young man answers promptly. With a serious look, he says that today he will teach him a sword art. The young man is shocked and remembers that in his past life, it took a year to learn. He wonders why his master is teaching the technique so suddenly. The man explains that this was an art he hoped his disciples would never have to use, but he decides he will show the technique to the young man that very night. He then asks the disciple to watch carefully and engrave it all in his heart. With a smile, he says he hopes the young man never follows the same path as him. The master then advances alone, and the protagonist watches him, not understanding. With a single sword strike, he destroys the front gate with ease. The guards appear and shout in confusion, asking who is invading the place. Unfazed, the man continues to walk toward the guards. The young man watches the scene, completely shocked by his master's actions. He then shouts for the guards to tell their leader that he has arrived. With a look of fury, he announces himself as the leader of the Seongui Sect. He then faces the guards alone with his sword in hand, ready for a fight. The young man thinks that he knew it wasn't a friendly visit, but he's still surprised. He never imagined the man would destroy the front gate just to get in. The master then turns and tells his disciple to watch very carefully. With his sword in hand, he charges toward the guards without hesitation. Summoning multiple swords, the master advances fearlessly among the guards. One of the men falls to the ground with a deep cut on his neck. With a calm look, he says that the beginning always hides in silence. The young man is shocked and realizes that this is the dawn of the sword of righteousness. He then understands that his master would teach him through real combat. With a powerful strike, a golden energy descends upon the guards. With a shadow mask, he prepares for the next move. A gust of blue energy destroys everything around him in an instant. The protagonist realizes the order of the attacks is the same as in his past life. Desperate, The guards shout for someone to inform the sect leader about the attack. With wide eyes, the hero wonders if this is the master's true strength. The man then says that this is just the beginning and prepares another attack. With a swift move, he cuts down another guard with a blade of blue energy. The energies mix and spin, cutting down the enemies in their path. The young man watches intently and remembers the names of each of the moves. He thinks that he always found the sword art mediocre, but he was wrong. With the sword in his hand, he realizes his master can win this alone. Looking at the bodies on the ground, he understands the power of the sword of righteousness. The young man thinks that his master's strength is the reason for the great assembly's request. He then realizes this is the first time he's ever seen the man's true ability. Suddenly, the master tells him to fall back, and the young man is confused by the warning. Heavy footsteps approach, and a group of men appears in the courtyard. It was the enemy sect's leader, who glares at him with a look of pure fury. With eyes red with rage, he yells, asking how he dares to do this. The protagonist recognizes him, and his master calls him closer. The man asks if he understood the lesson, but the young man says now is not the time. A stormy landscape illustrates the explanation of the sword art. He then says that if the young man forges a new path within that art, it will become a technique that belongs only to him, and the young man is shocked. Surrounded by enemies, the two prepare for the fight ahead. The gang leader asks if he thinks he'll get away with this after harming his men. The master then says calmly that he only came to collect a debt. Confused, the leader glares at him and asks what kind of debt that is. The man tells his disciple that this is the path he carved in the art. Suddenly, one of the leader's men falls to the ground, and the chief is shocked. With a face full of hatred, he grinds his teeth, not understanding what happened. A red aura surrounds the master, and the leader screams his name in a fury. He then charges forward to attack, angrily calling him a scoundrel. In the middle of the smoke, he swings his weapon and asks where the master is. With the opponent's weapon at his chest, he screams his son's name. With eyes red with hatred, he thinks of his sect and all that he has built. Shrouded in smoke, the gang leader swings his weapon in a powerful attack. The young man watches the scene, confused about what's happening in the smoke. With a wounded face, the gang leader emerges from the smoke and glares at the young man. He yells that it's all the young man's fault, and the protagonist understands he's frustrated. The leader says that because of a brat like him, everything went wrong. The hero prepares to fight but knows the skill gap is enormous. With focused eyes, he concentrates so as not to miss any of his opponent's moves. In a swift motion, he manages to dodge the man's surprise attack. Furious, the leader calls him a little rat and prepares another strike against him. He then lunges to attack the young man, but something stops him midway. A figure emerges from the smoke, and the leader screams the master's name in desperation. With a worried look, the young man calls for his master, who appears in front of him. The young man wonders if this is the path his master chose to follow. With a wounded and surprised face, the gang leader stares at him in disbelief. He then kneels, defeated, amidst the bodies of his men. With a look of despair, he wonders what he did so wrong. Wounded and covered in blood, the master looks down on him with a cold gaze. The leader yells that he went too far, just because of a single assassin. With the sword in hand, the master glares at him, and a fountain of blood erupts from the ground. With a calm expression, he asks his disciple if he watched everything carefully. The young man confirms, and the man asks what he thought of the demonstration. With focused eyes, the young man remembers the entire fight he just witnessed. He then says he found the scene sad, and the master looks at him in silence. With a slight smile, he agrees and thinks that in a single night, everything changed. At dawn, the city of Ansang seemed as calm and peaceful as ever, but the Seongui Sect had vanished completely from the county forever. Far away, a man in a red mask meditates in a dark room. Candles with colorful flames burn in an incense burner before him. Suddenly, one of the candles goes out, and black smoke rises into the air. The masked man says that a seed has withered and wonders what happened. He then deduces that it was guac chil, of the Seongui Sect in Ansang. He remembers receiving a generous donation when the young man was entrusted to him. A mysterious voice asks if he remembers that young man from his past. A lit candle illuminates the ceiling of the room as the voice answers yes. The masked man asks how he passed on, and the voice explains that he was in hair. Amidst the smoke, the master holds his sword and thinks about the path he chose. Surrounded by his men, the gang leader prepares to attack the master. The man glares at the master and his disciples with a look of fury and determination. The master then says he couldn't stand by while his disciple was threatened. The gang leader asks what he's talking about and demands proof of the accusation. Calmly, the master says he has no proof and that he came straight to the location. Furious, the leader shouts that he insulted him and attacked his disciples without evidence. He then thinks that without proof, no one will complain if the master departs from that place. With that, he tells him to go back and only return when he has some concrete evidence. He says he will let him go, but will hold him responsible for the events. The master then gives a mocking and scornful smile to the gang leader. Suddenly, he starts laughing loudly, leaving his opponent completely confused. With a dark aura, he says that is a concern for the living, not for those who are about to go. Shocked, the gang leader can't believe what he just heard. One of his men is cut down by a blade of red energy and falls to the ground. The leader watches in terror as his men are attacked from all sides. He thinks that he couldn't even sense the attack that took down his men. Frightened, they wonder if the master is really that powerful. With a grim look, he declares that the Seongui Sect will disappear from Ansang. In the blink of an eye, the master moves forward with impressive speed. With a series of strikes, he cuts down all the men in his path. The protagonist watches the scene with wide eyes, completely shocked. He wonders if this is the path of the sword that his master forged. Watching the scene, he thinks that this is a slaughter, but quickly corrects himself. He then says the word carnage would be more fitting to describe the scene. The young man realizes that in the midst of the mist, his master is a true calamity. A blue aura envelopes his body, and he feels his heart method resonating. He then understands that he can feel everything through the emanating Manhwa energy. The mist is the manifestation of the master's energy, something he has never seen before. He thinks his master's level is off the charts, and there's no way to describe it. Desperate, the remaining men shout to run and call him a monster. The leader yells for them to get a grip, but his men continue to fall. With wide eyes, he and his companion watch the scene in shock. The companion then calls for his father, who looks back at him with a serious expression. A shadow passes over the leader's face as he prepares for the attack. Suddenly, he feels a cut on his neck and is completely confused. Far away, the masked man is informed about the situation in Ansang. He then comments on a blind man who is too vicious and persistent. The voice asks if he's going to leave the man alone, as they've already lost a lot because of him. With a finger on his chin, the masked man thinks for a moment about what to do. He then says to forget it, as the grand plan is near, and they shouldn't provoke him. The voice agrees with the order, and the masked man says that pawns are plentiful. He continues meditating in the dark room, with the lit candles around him. With a smile, he says he also has many seeds, and young people are training with swords. The masked man calls them fools for coming without knowing how they would be used. Suddenly, another candle lights up, and he realizes one more seed has been planted. With energy in his hand, he identifies the child as being from the Wong-un clan. Far away, the master and his disciple walk through a city at dawn. The older man then reveals that in the past, he was a failed scholar. He says that because he was literate, he got a job at a merchant guild. With a nostalgic look, he says that he then met a wonderful woman. A memory shows him happy with his wife, and he shares that he started a family. The young man is shocked, as he can't imagine his master living a normal life. But the older man's expression turns serious, and the mood suddenly changes. He remembers that an evil sect demanded he steal the guild's books. After his refusal, he says with a heavy heart that he lost his entire family. His wife was left behind, lifeless, and his child vanished without a trace. Holding his beloved, he discovered that the culprits were from that wicked sect. In that moment, the man felt a desire for revenge completely consume him. With his face bathed in tears, he felt completely powerless and lost. It was then that he realized he needed power and martial arts to get revenge. However, he was already too old to start training and become a warrior. Then he says he met a benefactor who would change his destiny forever. The young man then says the name Manhwa, and the older man confirms his suspicion. He explains that what he obtained back then was Manhwa and the will of heaven. He explains that an old scholar gave him a very ancient martial arts manual. The man himself had picked up the book a long time ago in some random, dusty used bookstore. Not knowing its origin, he threw himself into training like a complete madman. But suddenly, a sharp pain strikes him, and he feels something strange in his chest. Soon after, his body is flung far away by a blast of red energy. With that, the poor man ends up coughing up blood, completely exhausted from the technique. He remembers that he almost passed on more times than he could count during those training sessions. But even so, the warrior simply couldn't stop his training, for he would rather meet his end than fail to complete his revenge. Time passed, and he continued to train non-stop, day after day, tirelessly, until finally, the swordsman managed to control all that power with perfection. With his eyes focused, he felt a new strength awakening within him. That's how, in the end, he managed to fully open the gate of Manhwa. In the sword of heavenly will, he found his path and called it blood debt. Wrapped in a black cloak, he set out to take down those who had made him suffer. In doing so, he brought down the faction that ruined his family and then took revenge on another. One target led him to the next, and so he dismantled 5 dark factions all by himself. He says that the world nicknamed him the Immortal Sword, and the boy calls him Master. The old man remembers his pupil saying his sword looked sad, and the young man remains quiet. He says that when the revenge was over, nothing was left, and he learned that his son had also passed on. After finishing his story, the mentor and his apprentice walk together through the garden. The older man clenches his fist and continues talking to the boy by his side. Turning to the young man, he faces his student with a slightly lighter expression. The master reveals he had no more reason to live until he found that boy. A memory shows the day the man found the young boy alone and helpless. With that, he says that the pupil made him start over and that the young man is his benefactor. The man says he may be a flawed teacher, but he is still his master and guardian. Hearing all that, the boy regrets having hated him in his past life. He then understands that his protector also had his own pain to carry alone. The master then calls to him and says it's finally time for them to go home. The apprentice breaks into a beautiful smile and happily agrees with his dear mentor. Back home, the young man says he's happy to finally understand everything. In the courtyard, the old swordsman and his student face each other in silence for a moment. Breaking the silence, the master extends his own sword to the young man before him. He hands over the weapon and says that from this day on, that blade belongs to the boy. The young man happily holds the sword and thinks that this is a very different beginning. Then the mentor asks the boy to show him his sword of heavenly will. Without hesitation, the apprentice wields his new weapon and prepares for training. With his arms crossed, the old man says that this time, he himself will observe the sword. The boy smiles with determination and thinks that there's no way he could have forgotten the technique. He thinks that although he didn't master the technique in the past, he trained his whole life for it. With that, the young man shouts that he will show his master his sword of heavenly will. Seeing this, the master is completely shocked, not understanding the pressure he feels. In the blink of an eye, the boy's blade cuts through the air with absurd speed. However, in the middle of the movement, the young man suddenly sheathes his sword. Right after, the boy simply takes off running and flees as if nothing happened. He runs towards another student and calls him older brother to play it off. Panting, the young man thinks it's better for him to take a short break before continuing. In his mind, the boy is dying of embarrassment and finds the situation humiliating. He remembers shouting with all his might to use the technique and failing miserably. When it was time to strike, the boy couldn't handle the weapon's weight and almost dropped it. With that, he went into a total panic, realizing his body was too weak for it. With nothing left to do, the boy ended up letting go of the sword, which flew far away from him. The weapon flew right past his master's face, who just watched with a serious look. The young man then tried to cover up his failure, but his mentor had already seen everything. Embarrassed, the boy apologizes, and the master says it was his fault for not teaching him. But the man smiles and says that first, they need to train his student's body. The boy starts running and understands that he tried to use a real weapon with a fragile body. He realizes he almost hit his protector by accident in an unprecedented case. Watching him train, the other students comment that their older brother is very cool. While running, the young man thinks that he needs a solid foundation to use martial arts. Suddenly, the master stops him and warns that it's enough, or he'll get hurt. With a calm gaze, the man shows his concern for his apprentice's well-being. The boy stops running, completely exhausted, and calls out his master's name. The old man says the boy is drenched in sweat, and the boy gets embarrassed right away. Then, the mentor tells him to go wash up, because they need to go to an important place. The young man is startled and asks if the real culprit wasn't the Jadok Hall. But the master just calmly replies that they are going to a place called Songno. Confused, the boy asks him to repeat it, and the man confirms their destination's name. Hearing the name of the place, the young apprentice gets a very worried expression. He imagines a place full of women and wonders if it's some kind of entertainment house. The mentor gives a smile and comments that his student seems to be very well informed. At that, the boy nervously replies that he's only 14 years old, and the old man starts to laugh. The boy thinks that even though they are close, he doesn't want to go to a place like that with his master. Seeing his reaction, the man asks with a smile if he really doesn't want to go. With little choice, the apprentice says he'll go get ready, and the master nods. As he walks away, the young man thinks that if his mentor ordered it, then they must go. The scene changes to a woman analyzing several scrolls in a luxurious room. She holds a pipe and comments that her uncle really outdid himself this time. They finally arrive at their destination, a place called Songno. That place was not a common entertainment house like the others that existed around there, for the jisangs of the place sold only their dance and their art to the clients. In other words, they didn't sell themselves, and the place was high class for the region. The young apprentice observes the place and reflects on the current situation. He still finds it very strange to have to go to a place like that with his master. Just then, the man approaches and says he came to see the owner of the house. The woman then invites them in and guides them down the main hallway. With that, she leads them to a more private corridor to meet the leader. A voice from afar says they came from the Seongui Sect, and the leader responds. The mysterious voice then asks the employee to accompany them to the room. The woman then asks the gentleman to help himself, and the man watches her. The master and his pupil follow the woman in silence down the luxurious hallway. The boy looks in surprise at his mentor, who seems very calm about the situation. Suddenly, the beautiful owner of Songno appears and asks if they are the guests. In his mind, the young man thinks that he didn't know about his master's connection to this place. He wonders if his mentor gathered silver thanks to Songno for the meetings. The owner of the place looks at him and says he's quite young, then introduces herself as Wooliang. With a smile, she asks if the boy wants to work there, and he refuses on the spot. The young man awkwardly replies that he is not inclined towards that sort of thing. Hearing the boy's response, the woman falls silent with a curious expression. She starts to laugh and says the boy has more of a silver tongue than she imagined. Then, the woman comments that the rumor about the disciple being gentle has spread around. The boy thinks that's what people have been saying about him behind his back. He gets irritated because being known as gentle means everyone sees him as an easy target. However, the boy thinks with determination that from this day on, all of that will change. The master interrupts the conversation and says that's enough playing around for now. Upon hearing that, the boy is shocked because she called his master uncle. With her arms crossed, The woman faces the man with a very serious expression. The woman then questions him about how he took down the Jagok Hall in a single night. The man replies that the circumstances of that day required a drastic measure. She questions whether she should keep the secret or if she should let everything be revealed. The master then asks what will happen if she lets everyone know. The woman warns that it wouldn't even take half a day for them to find out who did it. She reveals that the request from the Lord of Jagok Hall was the second one he made to them. The first was when the third wife of the hall master passed away a few years ago. With a smile, she asks if he doesn't think it's best to let everything be known. But the man surprises her and tells her to let everyone know the truth. The woman is shocked and warns that if he does that, things will get complicated. She looks at the young apprentice, who is just silently observing their conversation. She then asks if his attitude is because of the boy by his side. Hearing all of this, the young man is shocked, because Seongno was an intelligence organization. In his mind, he thinks that he lived his whole life in Anchanian and never knew this. He then wonders why his master hid the truth from him in his past life. The boy also doesn't understand why his mentor is letting him see all of this now. The woman sighs and agrees with the man's decision, albeit reluctantly. With that, she says she will take care of cleaning up Jagok Hall and sets a condition. The master agrees and says that they also have their own matters to resolve. The woman then thanks the man with a slightly grumpy expression on her face. She turns and questions the leader about why he brought the boy along. The master reveals that he has a favor to ask of her, and the young man is instantly confused. The man says he will let the young people sort things out and simply leaves. Seeing this, the apprentice desperately calls out for his master, who leaves him behind. The boy panics and yells for him to wait, but the man is already gone. The woman then asks what he is doing and why he isn't drinking anything. Soon after, a reddish-colored liquid is served in a small bowl. With a smile, she offers the drink to the young man and invites him to drink with her. With little choice, the boy ends up drinking a little of the liquid from the bowl. She explains that, as he saw, the house of Seongno deals only with information. The woman says that the information they handle is only for his master. She looks at him and asks if that is really a question he needs to ask. With a smile, she apologizes and says that organizations charge for information. The boy asks what she wants him to use as a form of payment for her. The woman then calls him hopeless and looks at him with a disdainful gaze. However, she says that just for today, she will answer whatever he wants for free, and the young man thanks her. She asks if he wants to know why she and his master have this kind of relationship. The woman reveals that it's because of an old bond born from a shared wound. Furthermore, she asks how much he already knows about his mentor's past. The boy says he knows he was a scholar who worked in a caravan and had a family. She asks if he knows about the revenge, and the young man confirms he knows that too. Hearing that, the woman says it will be simple and that she will tell him everything. The caravan the merchant's uncle was a part of helped him escape when he almost perished. She then reveals that she is the daughter of the master of that same merchant caravan. The young apprentice is completely shocked by the woman's revelation. He finally understands why she calls him uncle, and that they are not blood relatives. The boy asks why the daughter of a merchant group's leader went bankrupt. She explains that shortly after her uncle left, they were attacked, and she fled. With her eyes closed, the woman remembers agonizing over it for a long time. At that time, all she could think about was how she could get her revenge. That's how she set up the Jisang house and started dealing with information. She finishes her story and says that's how she was reunited with his master. The young apprentice is surprised to hear the whole truth about his mentor's past. He remembers that in his past life, his master never said a word about his past. That's why he never mentioned Seongno, as it was a story linked to his past. The young man then thanks the woman for telling him everything, leaving her a bit surprised. With a determined look, the boy says that thanks to her, he has learned a lot about everything. But the woman smiles and reveals that it was actually she who was grateful to him for everything. She says that her uncle always seemed very unstable and that his sect saved him. The woman reveals that the man asked her to spread the news about what happened. Upon hearing that, the boy asks if she knows what that really means. In a panic, the young apprentice stands up from the table and shouts that it can't be true. The woman observes him and comments with a smile that rumors are not reliable. The successor of the Seongui Sect was not a fool, and the master was not an Ansang Hyan. The boy realizes that his mentor intends to confront the Murim head on alone. She nods in agreement and says that now, no one will be able to touch the sect disciples, for they would have to endure her uncle's wrath and face the consequences. The boy thinks that with this, his master will have restrictions imposed on him in the future. The woman says that those with grudges will prepare to face her uncle in the future. With a worried look, the young apprentice can only mutter to himself in frustration. She stands up and says she's going to have problems with her uncle, and that they should stop there. With a smile on her face, she turns and asks if his questions are over. At this, the boy says he still has one more question to ask before he leaves. The woman turns to him and looks at him with a serious expression, waiting for the question. The young apprentice then asks with a nervous look if the master's revenge is over. The woman just observes him in silence for a moment, not knowing what to answer. Suddenly, a faint smile forms on the woman's lips as she remains silent. She then returns the question to the boy and asks him what he thinks. The scene cuts to the night and shows the young apprentice leaving the meeting place. He runs desperately through the dark forest, trying to get home as fast as possible. However, a sharp pain strikes him, and he feels that his wounds still hurt. The boy grinds his teeth in pain, and sweat pours down his face from the effort. Despite the pain, the young man lets out a cry and starts running again with all his strength. Exhausted, the boy can barely stay on his feet and thinks he'd rather pass out right there. With tears in his eyes, the young apprentice wonders why he is still so weak. He remembers the master's journeys and the mutually beneficial relationship between them. Suddenly, the young man trips over his own feet while running through the forest. With no strength to get up, he ends up falling hard onto the dirt ground. Lying on the ground, the boy comes to a single conclusion about his master's situation. Angrily, he punches the ground and understands that his mentor's revenge is not yet over. He sits up and realizes that, on top of everything, a disciple is becoming a burden to him. Suddenly, a voice warns him that he's overdoing it again, and the boy gets startled. He turns and sees his master standing nearby, watching him silently in the darkness. The young man bows and says his mentor has finally returned home, and the man agrees. With a smile, the older man tells him to stop, as it will only ruin his health. The boy remains silent for a moment, a tear streaming down his face. Trying to hide it, he says he was just about to stop his training on his own. He asks if the master has had dinner, but the man replies that he ate on the way. The mentor questions why he is pushing himself so hard with his open wounds. At this, the boy remembers that he can't let a sword fly in his direction again. The man laughs and tells him not to worry, because he is not that incompetent. The young apprentice is a bit confused by his master's attitude at that moment. Then the older man turns and says with a smile that he, his master, is very strong. The boy gives a faint smile and nods, as he knows that very well. The man tells him to go to sleep and informs him that he will be leaving again, and the young man says goodbye. With his head down, the apprentice reflects on everything that just happened there. He wonders if a master with the sect's chains is still strong. The boy then decides that he doesn't want to be someone who just holds him back and gets in his way. Alone in the courtyard, the young apprentice prepares to start a new training session. With a blue aura around his body, he clenches his fist and says he will get stronger. He needs to do this to be able to walk a different path from his past life. The boy thinks that to achieve that, he needs to start somewhere. With a smile, he decides he will start by washing all his dirty clothes. He wonders how long he was away to let so much laundry pile up. The young man picks up a piece of clothing and remembers how hard it was to bring it without being seen. Suddenly, a girl calls him, and he turns around, surprised to see who it is. The girl asks what's going on, and he says he told her to stay downstairs. She questions him about what he's doing, and the boy finds the situation very complicated. The two young apprentices look at each other in silence for a moment by the riverbank. With a flushed face, the girl calls him a fool, and the boy is a bit confused. She asks if he really thought they wouldn't find out the truth. The young woman reveals that on that day, she saw him return with the master at dawn. She asks if the blood on the clothes wasn't his, and the boy is left speechless. With tears in her eyes, the girl says that it's all completely her fault. She explains that because of her fight, they had to fight in her place. The boy tries to console his friend, who continues to cry with guilt in front of him. He hugs her and wonders what heavy thoughts have filled her mind. The young man says it's not her fault, and that he had no idea she was carrying this guilt. However, the girl shouts, "No," and looks at him with a determined expression on her face. With fire in her eyes, she shouts with all her might that she needs to get much stronger. Seeing this, the boy is shocked and doesn't understand his friend's sudden reaction. The girl starts talking about her father and remembers a moment with him. She says he's gone because of her, and she couldn't do anything to help him. With her fists clenched, the young woman shouts with all her might that she's tired of it. She says she will get strong for everyone, and that she doesn't want to see anyone else get hurt. With a smile, the boy agrees and wonders if that's why she left the sect. He remembers that she left because she felt she couldn't protect anyone. Before leaving, she was an average martial artist and couldn't bear to see others hurt. The young woman then says that when the master returns, she will beg him to teach her. She promises that when she gets strong, she will be the one to protect him, and the boy smiles. With a slightly flushed face, the young man thanks his friend for her concern. She asks if the laundry will take long, and he says he's almost done. The two young apprentices stand in silence for a moment by the riverbank. He holds a washing stick and thinks that all fundamentals begin with the mind. Work can be training, and training can be work, and he didn't understand that. Suddenly, a blue aura surrounds him, and he decides he will work even harder. He thinks that if everything can be training, then he won't waste a single second. With a golden glow, the boy swings the stick with surprising force. The strike creates a huge wave of energy that spreads across the entire river. The girl is completely shocked and drenched by the explosion of water. Impressed by her friend's power, the young woman shouts with excitement at what she saw. She asks what that was, and the boy is at a loss for words. He wonders if that was the sword of heavenly will he tried to use. In his mind, the young man is shocked because he used the technique with a laundry stick. Sometime later, the boy walks through the courtyard with the other disciples of the sect. Running through the courtyard, he becomes breathless and tries to control his breathing. Several days had passed, and he still remembered that moment at the river. He tried to replicate the feat but couldn't, no matter what, as his friend watched. The young man understands that the only thing that changed was his state of mind. He remembers chopping wood, sweeping, sewing, and cooking as part of his training. The boy finally realizes that all of that was part of his training. With that, he just needs to find that strange sensation once more. He focuses on the familiar movements of his body to try to understand the technique. Even the simple act of running becomes part of his daily training. Running is the result of his entire body working in perfect harmony. He thinks that if he keeps repeating this, enlightenment will come once more. The other disciples run with him and call him Elder Brother to support him. The boy laughs happily, training with his friends, and continues to run. He thinks that things are changing for him, for his brothers, and for the sect. The young apprentices continue to run together through the sect's courtyard in harmony. With a smile, the boy tells everyone to take a break, and they celebrate happily. One of the apprentices calls out to the young man, who promptly responds to his call in the courtyard. He then asks for help sweeping the floor, and the boy accepts with a beautiful smile on his face. While they sweep, the young man thinks that lately, the apprentice wants to do everything with him. He advises him to sweep slowly, and thinks that he is happy to spend time with the younger ones. The boy realizes he values them more than he imagined, and the other asks if he's doing it right. He remembers that in the past, he was so exhausted that he had forgotten that feeling. Suddenly, The other apprentice starts sweeping the floor in a very clumsy way. He seems to be struggling, and the young man asks with concern if he is okay. With that, he instructs him to relax his body and shows him how to do the movement. His feet move lightly, demonstrating the correct technique for his friend. With the broom in his hand, he watches himself sweeping through the energy of Manhwa. He concentrates on the movement of his body and the sensation of his feet on the ground. His hands glow with energy as he firmly grips the broom handle. His eye shines with an intense blue light as he reaches a new level of understanding. With a swift movement, he spins the broom and discovers a new path of the sword. A powerful slash of energy is unleashed from the broom in a perfect arc. The other young man is shocked to see the huge explosion of dust and energy. Amidst the dust, the boy remains focused with the broom in his hands, ready to strike. The force of the blow was so great that it cracked the entire stone floor around him. With a smile, he realizes he has finally mastered his sword of 1,000 clothes. Night falls over the sect, and everything seems very quiet and silent in the place. Lying in his bed, the young apprentice says he is tired of it all. He thinks that since that day, traces of the heavenly sword have appeared in his life. With that, even suing became part of his daily training. With his eyes closed, the boy feels the energy flowing throughout his body. He realizes that with his changed mindset, training has become a part of his life. Wielding the sword, he practices his movements in the forest with a blue aura. Lying in bed, he understands that he can no longer think of them as separate things. With a blue aura, the young apprentice finally understands that everything is him. His energy expands and covers the entire sect with a surprising power. He remembers that in his past life, he didn't think he had a life of his own. But now, the boy realizes that in fact, he has always had his own life. In his mind, he understands that both in the past and now, he has always been himself. Suddenly, one of the disciples calls him at his room door. The young apprentice opens the door and tells his friend that he is already up. With a smile, he reveals that he actually couldn't sleep well that night. He touches his stomach and feels a blue energy emanating from his body. With a smile, the boy tells his friend that his inner power has finally returned. He remembers thinking that his power had been completely depleted back then. As they walk, he thinks that his power is the link between him and Manhwa. Just then, the other apprentice asks if he has gotten taller, and the young man is startled. The boy insists that he looks taller, and the young man says there can't be. He thinks that he shouldn't grow for at least another year, and is very confused. His friend points to his feet and says that his clothes look much shorter. He wonders if it's because of Manhwa, and if his growth spurt came early. The other apprentice looks at him and says that's to be expected from an older brother. With his eyes shining, he asks if he will grow too if he trains like him. The boy then runs off and says he will try much harder in that day's training. Seeing that, the young man is at a loss for what to do with his friend's excitement. With a smile, he just says it's okay and lets him go train alone. He closes the gates, wakes up, and feeds the disciples before starting the training. As always, they run together through the sect's courtyard to train their endurance. Tired, they take a break to rest and catch their breath from the run. One of the boys says they are running more than usual, and the young man confirms it. In his mind, he reveals that it is thanks to the energy of Manhwa in his body. He feels his body pull and push the key from the outside, filling it with vitality. With this, he understands that it's as if the energy of Manhwa is circulating within him. He stretches and realizes his whole body grew overnight from it. The boy asks where Hoyin is, and the other replies that he went out to play. With a nervous smile, he says he gets worried when his friend disappears for too long. Suddenly, one of the young apprentices comes running and shouts for the older brother. With wide eyes, the boy turns around because he can feel something approaching. The young apprentice says he can feel it with his ki and that he has finally arrived. With a shout, he announces to everyone that the sect master has finally returned. The boy bows and welcomes his mentor, who just nods his head. The other young ones also bow and welcome the master with a smile. The older man looks at them with a serious expression on his face and remains silent. With a faint smile, he asks if they are all well, and the young ones confirm. The two stand in silence for a moment, just looking at each other in the sect's courtyard. The apprentice thinks with relief that fortunately, his master doesn't seem to be injured. He looks at the older man with a slightly confused expression on his face. With a smile, the mentor says that his disciple has grown quite a bit lately. Hearing that, the young apprentice blushes a little and breaks into a beautiful smile. The master congratulates him and says he is proud of him, and the boy thanks him happily. He thinks that his master has acknowledged him, and the girl calls him over to talk. With a determined look, the young apprentice asks him to teach her martial arts. The man is a bit confused and asks why she wants to learn that. The boy thinks that she used to be nervous around the master, but now she has changed. With her fists clenched, the girl shouts with all her might that she will take them down. Seeing this, the two are confused, and the boy asks her to speak clearly. The master whispers that he thinks she saw what happened when they left the sect. With a determined look, the young apprentice holds her master's hand and looks at him. She says she wants to get strong to protect her older brother and the master from everything. Another young one joins in and also asks to learn because he wants to be like the older one. The master reflects that they have grown a lot and that the sect was just a stopping place. He remembers his revenge and that even after settling everything, he didn't find peace in his mind. He remembers wandering alone through a sea of darkness without direction. Back in the present, he looks at his disciples with a serene look on his face. The man understands that this place is no longer just a stopping place for him. He thinks that he is their master and that he is responsible for all these young people. The master feels guilty for having thrown all the responsibility onto the young apprentice. In his mind, he regrets that his disciple didn't realize the weight he was carrying. With that, the man agrees and says their training will start tomorrow. The boy smiles and thinks that he will no longer turn his back on his disciples. He hopes the children can walk a different path from his in the future. With a smile, the master hugs one of the children, who cries with happiness. He picks her up and says that now he wants to see how much his eldest disciple has grown. Everyone gathers at the table for a grand feast prepared by the sect master. He tells everyone to eat and puts some food on one of the young one's plates. With a flushed face, the young apprentice thanks his master with a beautiful smile. One of the young ones says he also likes meat, and the boy is shocked by the master's action. He thinks there has always been a distance between them, but the master serves him. With a smile, he realizes that this makes him very happy and feels welcomed. The man tells them to eat because afterward, he will teach martial arts to everyone, with smiles on their faces. All the young apprentices celebrate the news happily. Sometime later, the other disciples begin to learn martial arts. Since they were young, they started with the heart method of Manhwa, an internal technique. Tired, the young ones fall to the ground, and the boy says that's enough training for today. He asks how it went, and they say they are fine and that they won't give up. The master then tells everyone to go rest, and they nod in agreement. Alone in the courtyard, the man and his disciple prepare for the special training. The master asks if he is ready, and the boy holds his sword firmly. With a determined look, the young apprentice prepares to begin his training. He answers "Was," and faces his master with a confident smile on his face. The boy prepares to fight and thinks that he is nervous for no apparent reason. With the sword in his hand, he feels the sweat run down his face from the tension. In his mind, the young apprentice knows that his master is watching him closely. With a determined look, the boy thinks about how fleeting all of this is for him. He remembers the words he heard in his past life, that he had no talent. The young man thinks that even if he impresses the master, his destiny will not change. With that, he decides he will just show his master his new strength. Seeing this, the man is surprised by the power of his disciple's sword. The boy unleashes a slash of golden energy and thinks of the sword he used his whole life. With a shout, he reveals that this is his sword of heavenly will. He feels the sword tremble and thinks that his technique is still not perfect. But even so, he decides that an imperfect sword is enough for now. The boy is proud because he found the sword of heavenly will in 10 days. With that, he thinks it's okay to make mistakes and continues to deliver the blows. The young apprentice finishes his sequence of strikes and stops with the sword in hand. Tired and panting, the boy thinks that his test was finally over. Suddenly, the master approaches, and the young man gets nervous about what he will say. He remembers his master saying he had no talent and prepares for the worst. However, the man surprises him and says, with a smile, that he has a lot of talent. Shocked, the young apprentice looks at him, not believing what he just heard. The master repeats with a smile on his face that he said the boy has talent. The young man says it can't be and asks if his master isn't talking nonsense. He argues that he made many mistakes and couldn't even hold the sword properly. The man questions him and asks if what he means is that he has no talent. The master calls him by his name and asks him what true talent is. The young apprentice remains silent for a moment, not knowing what to answer. The master says that people call talent by many names, and that it's all the same thing. He asks if being born with a strong body or a heavenly constitution is talent. The man also questions if finding a new path of the sword with few strikes is talent. He continues and asks if being quick with calculations and analysis is also talent. The boy asks if it isn't, and the master says that everything is talent. But there is more. Suddenly, the man holds his disciple's wrist, who looks at him, very surprised. He shows the boy's calloused hand and says that this is also a type of talent. With a smile, the master says that he kept working without ever stopping. The young apprentice thinks of the word comfort, and his mentor says it's not just that. He reveals that the boy is someone who can find his own path and answers. With that, he says that if the young man doesn't give up, he will go further than anyone. The master declares that this is his true talent, and the boy gets emotional. The man calls him a sly one, and the young apprentice thinks he had never realized it. With tears in his eyes, the boy thanks him because he always wanted his recognition. He wanted to hear that he did well, and his master advises him to keep searching. The man promises that he will stay by his side and help him through the toughest times. With his head bowed, the young apprentice thanks him once more for all the support. The master then asks what he gained from all of this, and the boy is surprised. With a determined look, he reveals that he learned that everything is connected. The older man reflects on his disciple's answer and agrees with him. With a smile, he says that the young man has found a good path to follow in life. Suddenly, the other disciples see the boy shouting and get very scared. They watch him from a distance and don't understand what he is doing alone. The young apprentice lets out a loud shout and concentrates to begin his new training. With that, he takes a single step forward with all his strength and concentration. Tired, the boy says he finally understood, and the others watch him from afar. The young ones find their older brother strange and wonder what he is doing. One of them says he is practicing walking faster, but with just one step. With a cry of effort, the boy repeats the stepping motion over and over again. The other disciples continue to watch him from a distance with a confused look. One of the young ones runs to the master, who arrives in the courtyard to see what's happening. The child says that the older brother is being scary, and the man is confused. She complains that the boy keeps staring at them from afar, and that it's very strange. With a smile, the master just observes his disciple training in the courtyard. He asks what the young man is trying to show him this time. With a focused gaze, a tear runs down the boy's face from so much effort. He takes a powerful step forward and channels all his energy into the movement. The master watches him with a surprised expression at his disciple's power. The boy gets frustrated and shouts that this is much harder than he imagined. The man then asks what he was practicing, and the young man gets embarrassed. The boy bows and apologizes for the late greeting to his master. The mentor asks why he was staring at the wall like that. He remembers that in his past life, he only half belonged to the Murim world. With that, he thinks he never truly lived like a real master. However, he learned to take a beating and became very good at enduring blows. With this, he reveals that he learned one thing and was practicing a quick step. The older man asks if it was just a single step, and the boy confirms. With a smile, he says he was thinking about how not to get hit with just one step. But that single step can lead to the first attack in a battle, or it can become a faster guard to protect himself from enemies. It can also be the step that allows him to escape or change position in a fight. He summarizes it as attacking first, blocking first, and running first. For someone like him who is not a true master, that is the best he can do. Hearing that, the mentor says with a smile that he finally understood everything. With that, he pats the boy's head and tells him to keep it up. The young apprentice breaks into a beautiful smile and happily nods his head. The man gathers the disciples and says he has something important to tell them. With a serious look, he reveals that there will be a big meeting in 7 days. Upon hearing that, the young apprentices are shocked by the sudden news. The boy says the meetings are quarterly, and the master agrees it's early. He then understands that the Jagok Hall disappeared in a single night. The young man thinks that the local lords already know, because the master told them. After seeing the mentor's strength firsthand, he becomes a little tense. He remembers that in the past, they cut off contact with the sect without a second thought. With this, the boy understands that their intentions are quite obvious now. The master then announces that his eldest disciple will also go to the meeting. Hearing that, the young man is shocked and asks if he is really the one going. In his mind, he thinks he would rather stay at the sect to take care of the children. But they must be curious about the disciple his master values so much. With a serious look, he knows they won't let him hide this time. He doesn't plan to stand out, but thinks it's polite to show his face. The young apprentice remains silent for a moment, thinking about all of this. With that, he turns his head with a serious expression on his face. He sees the other disciples together and asks what they are doing there. One of them says there will be a lot of good food and fun things at the meeting. Another says she wants to go with the older brother, and the boy listens to the conversation. One of the young girls says she has a great idea, and the boy thinks they might ask. With that, the girl whispers her idea to the others, who listen attentively. Hearing the idea, the boy is shocked and asks if it really has to be him. The others encourage him and say that he is nice, and the older one watches, confused. With a determined look, the boy agrees to go ask the master. Seeing this, the older one gets nervous and wonders what they are planning. Suddenly, the master appears in the hallway and comes across the unusual scene. The young ones call out to him, and the man turns to them with a confused expression. At that moment, all the disciples position themselves in front of their master in the hallway. The older one wonders what they are up to and watches them curiously. With a shout, they all ask together to go with him to the meeting. They clasp their hands in a gesture of pleading to try to convince the master. One of the young ones makes a cute face and sweetly asks him to let them go. They all make the same gesture and try to use their cuteness to convince him. Seeing this, the older one is completely shocked and at a loss for words. In his mind, the master is terrified of his disciple acting all cute. The children ask him to do it again, and the young man repeats the cute face for them. The older man then calls his disciple with a very serious look. The boy turns to him and answers his call with a nervous expression. With a flushed face, the master tells him to go prepare the disciples for the journey. At that, the children celebrate happily, and the boy tells them to get ready. The girl asks if they can go now, and the young apprentice is embarrassed. The boy laughs at the situation, and the young man shouts in embarrassment at his older brother. He thinks it's the first time they have all gone out together like this. They arrive at the Jangyan clan, the richest in the Ansiang Haiyan region. Because of this, its influence was enormous, and the disciples arrive impressed. One of the young ones is enchanted by the size of the place because they aren't just rich. In the past, they were landowners who became a martial arts clan. Their wealth and connections would have already surpassed the level of a province. But the young apprentice wonders what the reason was for the clan's self-destruction. Suddenly, the patriarch of the Jangyan clan appears to welcome them. The master looks at him and thinks that the man in front of him seems very different. He remembers that the patriarch was once a much more serious and impatient man. The boy reflects that before, he didn't even care what his master thought of him. With a smile, the older man welcomes them and says he was expecting them. The young apprentice thinks that now they can't make any enemies. The patriarch asks if it was a bother, and the master says everything is fine. With that, he invites everyone to enter the main hall of his clan. The master apologizes for the delay, but thinks he is tired of all this. The man says there is no problem, and that they arrived at the right time for the meeting. The boy thinks it's better that they don't collapse like in the past. He knows that soon, large and small chaotic events will happen. That's why they need to strengthen the bonds between the 4 remaining sects. Besides, the young apprentice feels there is still one more thing to do. The master tells him to greet the others, and the boy nods in agreement. With that, he bows and introduces himself as the first disciple of the Seongui Sect. His posture is polite but not subservient, showing respect and confidence. Seeing this, the clan's patriarch is a little surprised by the young man's attitude. The boy thinks that the first disciple, who was merely gentle, no longer exists. He wants to be acknowledged so he won't be ignored, even without the master's support. Soon after, the other young disciples also introduce themselves to the patriarch. With a nervous smile, the man says they have grown a lot since the last time. He comments that the master must be proud, and the other says there is a long way to go. Suddenly, the patriarch makes a signal with his hands and says it's time to begin. With a smile, he announces that the meeting will now officially begin. The camera then pulls back to show the grand, main hall of the Jangian clan. On a balcony, the young disciples observe the scenery with a smile on their faces. One of them eats happily and says the food at that place was very delicious. Another young girl asks if he liked it, and the boy nods excitedly. The older one thinks that in his past life, the clan destroyed itself. He remembers that it was because of the current patriarch, Jang gone, that everything fell apart. The boy wonders if he can prevent that since he is from another sect. Suddenly, one of the young apprentices meets a girl who is startled by him. He introduces himself, and the girl reveals her name is Jang-on Sohan, from the same clan. The boy says he is 5 years old, and the girl replies that she is the same age as him. She brags that she will be turning 6 soon, and the boy is impressed by that. With that, he shouts that he wants to turn 6 too, and the older one calms him down. In his mind, the boy thinks that his younger brother is the best at socializing. Elsewhere, one of the female disciples meets a boy named Jang Yaon Dahan. He asks her age, and the young girl replies that she is 9 years old. The boy says he is 10 years old, and suggests they get along since he is older. Seeing this, the older apprentice observes the interaction with a serious look. The boy offers her his toys, and the older one remembers that he used to flirt with her. He thinks that in the past, their first meeting happened much later. Then, he recalls that the boy suffered when she left the sect, even though they weren't dating. The boy then decides to leave them in peace and turns his attention to someone else. Suddenly, the patriarch's son appears and says his father has spoken highly of him. He is Jang Taehan, and the older apprentice also introduces himself to the boy. Taehan was known for having first-class potential in Ansang Hyan. The young man says they have seen each other before, and the apprentice remembers his future name. He would become one of the heroes of Jangyun, and the one responsible for the clan's ruin. Taehan compliments him, and the apprentice thinks he is very direct with his words. With a smile, the boy comments that he and his father seem to be very close. The other laughs, but the apprentice knows that in the past, their relationship was terrible. With the family in crisis, they couldn't withstand the attack from the Chagan gang. He notices their relationship is fine and wonders about the reason for the decline. The young man is distressed because that is another family's problem, not his. Suddenly, Taeyeon compliments him, and the apprentice doesn't understand his attitude. The boy says it was hard for him to hang out with kids his age around there. He explains that this was because they were from a very important clan. The apprentice understands and wonders why he became such a mess in the future. At this, he touches the boy's face, who screams in surprise at the sudden touch. The young man asks if he smells like sweat, and Tahan nervously says no. Looking at himself, The boy realizes he is sweaty and feels more relieved. He reveals that an elder from the Seongui Sect is there for their meeting. His father wants him to stand out, and the apprentice is shocked by the revelation. With wide eyes, he finally remembers an important detail. Now he understands the real reason Taehan became a mess. It was all because of the reclusive sage of Manhwa who was present at the location. He was a wandering sage who turned ordinary martial artists into elites. If he didn't show up, the ceremony and the talent evaluation would proceed as normal. But in his past life, the sage hadn't advised anyone for almost 20 years. He remembers that the clan spent its entire fortune to invite the sage of Manhwa. Because of this, the patriarch's son was confident he would be the one chosen by the sage. The boy remembers that young Taehan was the only one who would catch the sage's attention. But he did not become his disciple, and the sage left without any favor. With that, the conflict between father and son began, and the boy observes his friends. The patriarch, with an inferiority complex, became obsessed with his children, and those who did not meet his expectations began to stray from the path. In the end, the heir was cast aside, and the weakened clan fell at the hands of the son. The young apprentice thinks that he can't let Ansayan fall apart for his friend's sake. He wonders how to prevent this when Taehan arrives, apologizing for the delay. Suddenly, the boy says he is leaving, and the apprentice is very confused. He explains that he needs to get back to training because he doesn't know when the sage will notice him. But the boy reveals that, first of all, he really wanted to see the young apprentice. He wanted to know what the disciple his master cared so much about was like. With a smile, the boy thinks that his master is a good man and feels powerless. He can't bring himself to say that no matter how much he trains, he won't achieve anything. The other says he imagined as much and looks at him with a smile on his face. Taehan comments that his disciples are free and that his family is very strict. With that, he says goodbye to the older apprentice and leaves for his training. The boy wonders if he is really powerless and if there is nothing he can gain from this. He remains silent for a moment, thinking about everything that happened in the past. Suddenly, the other boy turns around and looks at him with a very confused expression. The apprentice asks if he can join him and thinks that a lot has already changed. He believes that perhaps someone more talented than him can also change the future. At the meeting table, the patriarch reveals that the Seongui clan is recruiting help. The master finds it strange because the Lord of Seongui wouldn't need outside swords. At this, one of the elders comments that the martial arts world seems restless. The master agrees and says that in times like these, they must unite even more. His eyes focus, and he senses something strange approaching the location. In his mind, he feels the presence of a supreme master and becomes very tense. He wonders what a Taoist from Wudang would be doing in that place. The patriarch and the sage apologize for the negligence, and the man says it's all right. With that, the host introduces the sage of Manhwa, who reveals himself as Bindon. The master introduces himself as the immortal sword and says it's an honor to meet him. Another master congratulates them for inviting such a famous sage to the meeting. The patriarch says the meeting is almost over and that he can leave if he wishes. The sage agrees and says he will leave first to rest a bit. Everyone at the table watches the older man stand up and leave the hall. The sect master looks at him with a doubtful expression on his face. He still wonders why a Taoist from Wuding came down the mountain. Suddenly, the sage stomps his foot on the ground and angrily curses it all. He complains that he can no longer pretend to be a virtuous and noble Taoist. The man says he is tired of walking on eggshells and has finally escaped from there. He has barely left Wuding Mountain, but he already feels uncomfortable with everything. Suddenly, he hears a familiar sound and runs to see what is happening. He hears a noise that reminds him of Wudang and decides to take a closer look. Young Taehan trains with his sword, delivering a quick and powerful strike. The sage observes him from afar with a thoughtful expression on his face. He remembers that this is the son of the clan chief, young Jang Hyan, Taehan. The older man recognizes the technique as the sword of balanced posture. He understands that the clan's intentions are obvious. As he is training a Wudang technique, they want the boy to become a disciple of Wuding, or get some advice. With a bored look, the sage thinks that this is not interesting at all. He has seen that technique enough for a lifetime and is not impressed. The sage thinks that the boy doesn't understand the true intention of that sword. Suddenly, the older apprentice appears to talk with young Taehan, impressed. The boy asks how long he has been training that technique. The young man replies that he has been training for 3 months, and the apprentice is shocked. He remembers that in his past life, it took him 3 months just to memorize one path. The other says his father has high hopes, but he feels ordinary with it. Hearing that, the apprentice feels a stomachache thinking about talent, but he tells the boy that he definitely has talent, and the other is surprised. With a smile, Taehan thanks him, and the apprentice thinks he understands his father's gamble. The young apprentice then makes a joke, and the other doesn't understand at all. He thinks that if the boy is so good, there's nothing for him to correct there. With that, he tells the boy that he is doing very well and encourages him to continue. He advises the young man not to rush and to walk his own path in life. He tells Taehan to follow his own path and not his father's with it. With a smile, the boy says goodbye and says he needs to get back to his training. From a distance, the sage observes the young apprentice walking away in the clan's courtyard. With a smile, he thinks that boy seems very interesting. The young apprentice stops in the middle of the courtyard and begins to concentrate his energy. With a loud shout, he releases all his energy at once in the area. The boy then executes a single quick step with a blue aura around his body. The sage observes the movement with a surprised expression on his face. Taehan is also shocked by the young apprentice's display of power. He practices the quick step over and over again to improve his technique. Suddenly, he loses his balance and ends up hitting his head on the ground. He complains that it's not working, and the other runs to help him, worried. The boy says he's fine, and Taehan asks what he was doing there. The sage finds that a fun way to see things and smiles at the scene. He thinks about the dream of having his stance noticed despite being a common disciple. Besides, he thinks the young man's training method is quite bizarre. With that, the sage approaches and says they don't know each other well yet. He looks at the young apprentice and asks where he is from with a serious expression. The boy thinks that he was in the middle of circulating his high energy, but even so, he couldn't feel the older man's approach. He is shocked because not even a ghost could have approached like that. Seeing this, the other boy bows and greets the venerable man. The young apprentice is sweating cold, not understanding what is happening there. He thinks that the only Taoist there besides Wudong should be the sage of Mua. With that, the boy makes a greeting gesture with his hands as a sign of respect. He introduces himself as the eldest disciple of Seongui and bows to him. The sage recognizes the sect's name, and the boy confirms he is one of its disciples. He asks what the other young man was doing, and he says he was practicing how to walk. The older man repeats the question, and the apprentice reflects on the past. He looks at the man who was the center of the clan's fall and answers his question. The sage questions him, and the boy thinks about how he needs to make a good impression. He reveals that he believes a single quick step can decide everything in a fight. With it, he can attack first before his opponent has a chance, or he can retreat faster and dodge enemy attacks first. Hearing the explanation, the older man looks at him with a very confused expression. With a smile, he understands that the boy wants to attack first and not get hit. He says he likes the idea, and the two young men look at him with a surprised face. The sage says this is the essence of all martial arts, and that he is right. In the end, it all comes down to preserving yourself while dominating your opponent. With that, he says the boy understood the truth of martial arts very early. Hearing that, the two young apprentices look at each other with a surprised face. The boy bows and thanks the sage for his kind and supportive words. He thinks it's strange to be acknowledged by someone other than his master, but he tells his friend that it was all thanks to him, and the other is surprised. He reveals that watching him train led him to this realization, and the other smiles. Taehan is a bit embarrassed, but gives a slight smile at his friend's compliment. The sage then says the young apprentice has thoughts as amusing as his own. Suddenly, He surprises him and asks if he wants to become his disciple. Hearing that, the two young apprentices are completely shocked by the offer. The boy is speechless and looks at him with an expression of total surprise. The man reveals that the head of Wudang is his great martial arts disciple. With that, he says the young man could become the heir to the sect leader one day. The boy wonders why him and not the boy who was standing next to him. Seeing the scene, the other young man remains silent with a sad expression on his face. With a smile, the sage extends his hand and asks if the boy will go with him. The young apprentice is in shock from the offer and doesn't know what to say. Suddenly, the sect master appears and points his sword at the sage. With a furious look, he asks what the man is trying to do. The boy is shocked to see his master, and the sage looks at him with a smile. He asks why the disciple is trembling so much, and the master becomes furious. With a serious look, he repeats the question, and the sage looks at him with a smile. He feels the man's killing intent and is a little surprised. With a green aura, the sage thinks that the other man looks like a murderous fiend. Seeing this, the boy is desperate and doesn't know what to do about the situation. He thinks his master looks like he's about to finish off the sage of Muwa. One of the clan chiefs remembers a saying passed down through generations in his family. He says they must not stop because still water stagnates and rots. This was the force that made the clan grow from a small family of landowners. One of the clan members trains with his sword, with a blue aura around his body. But since the last chief, the Jangyan clan began to stagnate and weaken. Tired and panting, the older man looks at his hands with a sad expression. He reflects that Jangyan is a martial clan and that it needs strength to grow. But for several generations, the strength of the chiefs did not improve and the clan stagnated. The patriarch looks at his son and says that young Jang Haiyan Tahan is different. With him, the clan can surpass Ansang Ian and reach the top of the Murim world. He scarred the land for elixirs and masters to help his son. Furthermore, he invested years of connections and money to bring the sage there. Suddenly, a red and a green aura clash, and the man is shocked.